Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. Going into 2021, the pandemic is now killing more people, shutting down more nonprofits and small businesses, along with wiping out the livelihoods of families, neighborhoods, and communities. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
I have to say that supporting staff who work 24/7 in person to care for kids who are in intensive level mental health treatment during this time has been really an amazing experience, a challenging and amazing experience. And our staff have at times been, scared, have gotten sick themselves. It's hard to keep the morale up. And they have continued to come in and run these services in just an incredible way. We have staff who are, coming in full PPE every day and every night to support kids who are going through these crises.
The harm on our mental health from the COVID-19 pandemic has been the most acute on our children, teenagers, and young adults. School closures and enforced social distancing has added to the uncertainty, social isolation, and parental angst, along with cutting off many teens and young adults from most of their psychological support. This has put our children at a much higher risk of developing or amplifying their anxiety and depression. Researchers at Harvard, Northeastern, Rutgers, and Northwestern universities conducted 8 large survey rounds across all U.S. states from April to October of 2020 and found that by October of 2020, over 36% of young adults had suicidal thoughts compared to just 32% in May of 2020 when the study started. These studies reinforced the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's August 2020 report that 25% of young people from 18 to 24 contemplated suicide in July of 2020 because of the pandemic-driven lockdowns. As our youth, families, and community struggle with these mental health realities, we wanted to feature the voices of Justine Underhill, the Chief Program Officer, and Gregg Biggs, the Director of Advancement from one of the legacy social service agencies in San Francisco that has been at the center of providing mental health services to our youth, Edgewood Center for Children and Families. I'm joined remotely by Gregg Biggs, the Director of Advancement, and Justine Underhill, the Chief Program Officer of Edgewood Center for Children and Families. Thanks for being here, Gregg and Justine. Edgewood has such a wonderful holistic approach to services. So I'd like to turn to you, Justine, first, and have you please provide for our audience a overview, if you will, of Edgewood's programs and how you work with families.
Sure. So before we started, you referred to an ecosystem of support, and I love that phrase. It's a great way to describe Edgewood. We have a comprehensive mental health agency that serves children, youth, and families in a range of programs, starting from prevention and intervention programs, like our Family Resource Center, parenting support classes, and our youngest little clients in our early childhood mental health consultation program, where we consult on creating positive mental health environments in early childhood settings. And then we range up to our outpatient mental health services, our therapeutic behavioral services, our wraparound and outpatient therapy, and all the way up to our residential treatment services, which are on our campus in the Sunset. So it's a full continuum of care for children and families in both San Francisco and San Mateo counties.
And are you still doing work in the East Bay?
Yes, thank you. One of our really important programs at Edgewood is our kinship program. And kinship program, we support kin caregivers, family members who have taken in children as an alternative to them going into the foster care system. And that means that they're saved from going into the system, but it also means that they don't get the kinds of resources that come with entering into that system. So we provide support for kinship families. And because so many families have moved out of San Francisco in recent years, we also service them in the East Bay.
So if a youth or a family might start with you in San Mateo or San Francisco at 5 or 6 years old, and then as you're working with them, and I think the whole idea that you stay with a family and youth for that long, if they move to the East Bay, essentially the service is following with them. They're not dropping out of the service, if you will.
Right. At least for that particular program. Sometimes we have some limitations with what can travel where in terms of funding sources and things. But for our kinship services, yes, we can follow them there.
And so much of the work that Edgewood's done over the decades is personal. It's one-on-one, it's in person. And now coming up on just over a year, we've been all locked down. How has the pandemic really impacted Edgewood's programs and your ability to deliver service?
Well, it's been huge, of course. I would say that we've had kind of two sets of really big tasks to undertake. One was to convert all of our community-based services, our outpatient services, to telehealth services so that our treatment could continue. And the second one was to keep an in-person residential treatment campus running safely and in person, which we've done the whole time. Both of those have been a tremendous amount of logistical work and a huge financial impact. We had our services up and running pretty much immediately in terms of telehealth. Everybody just kind of did what they had to continue with their clients. But it took us a little while to catch up to that in terms of the technology. Not all of our staff had been equipped with laptops and agency cell phones and what they needed to be able to do that work in a safe and confidential way. So it was a big logistical effort to kind of get that underway and to fund that. And the sort of operational impact of running our residential services and our crisis stabilization unit in person are really huge. There's a tremendous number of different issues that come up in terms of running congregate care safely. And at the same time, unfortunately, as we know, kids have been in a tremendous amount of crisis during this time. So we've also been busy with referrals. So it's been a lot of work, but our staff has done a tremendous job of keeping services intact. So we don't have any at Edgewood that has not stayed open to our clients or that's had a gap. It just took a lot of operational work to convert over.
Greg, I'm going to turn to you because you're in advancement in trying to help underwrite all of these services. How has COVID impacted Edgewood's financial abilities to actually deliver these services? Because it's more than just obviously IT. It's also all of the PPE work, and all those materials and making sure that your staff is safe and that your clients are safe.
Yeah, it's, getting the financial in-kind volunteer support we've had, like many had to pivot immediately a year ago. We had a successful fundraising campaign last spring, raised over $500,000 to provide things like hazard pay to staff that are, doing direct services on our campus here in San Francisco, to provide, personal equipment. And it was just a diversity of corporations, foundations, individuals that responded very generously. At the time, in pre-pandemic times, volunteering was a very important part of how our community and supporters get involved. And that obviously has not been something we've been able to do in person. So we have been creative on how we've been able to keep volunteers involved. Twitter, that's one of our corporate sponsors, put on a virtual sign fair for the kids in our Edgewood Community School. We have had other volunteers that have written cards of support to our kids and to our staff. A catering company provided meals to all of our workers that are reporting every day at the Vicente Street campus. Designer Amy Kuschel made handmade masks for our staff and for our clients. So we've seen, a wide range of ways that people can still stay involved, even though they can't be with us in person.
Justine, anything else on how the staff has responded to COVID or things that you both see, especially now with a new round of funding to come in to help that work? And to your point, I think what's finally, dawned on so many people is after a year of being locked down with each other, that mental health services are even that much more important than they were a year ago.
Yeah, I have to say that supporting staff who work 24/7 in person to care for kids who are in intensive level mental health treatment during this time has been really an amazing experience, a challenging and amazing experience. And our staff have at times been scared, have gotten sick themselves. It's hard to keep the morale up. And they have continued to come in and run these services in just an incredible way. We have staff who are, coming in full PPE every day and every night to support kids who are going through these crises. And it's really been heroic. And sometimes I think that, our healthcare workers are such heroes as they are. And so are our mental health care workers, who don't always get the same recognition, but I think we've really seen that at Edgewood. We have tried to do a tremendous amount in terms of supporting the staff and kind of responding to COVID. Our medical director, Dr. Randall, created a kind of a 4-tier plan to advise people every day sort of what tier of safety or danger we're on, kind of a risk level tier. We have a group that meets every morning and addresses kind of what tier we're on and any issues that are arising. And then we take that back out to the staff each day. So one of the things that's been expensive for us, but important, is that we paid our staff hazard pay or additional pay during the time that they were working when we were in a shelter-in-place order. We continue to pay extra stipends if staff ever need to supervise kids who may have symptoms or may need medical appointments, those kinds of things. We have a mandatory testing system for our staff. So all staff are required to be tested each month and report those results. And then we've worked very hard. Our staff have been fortunate to have the opportunity to be vaccinated. We've worked really hard to encourage that for all of our staff, as well as to provide information for our clients who our staff are also supporting in terms of getting vaccines. And then we've collaborated with the Department of Public Health when we've needed to around any kind of COVID safety issues on the campus. So we've done a lot to respond. And like I said, our staff has been really incredible.
And over the years that you've worked there, Justine, what would you say, and this is a question for you as well, Gregg, what would you say is Edgewood's biggest impact on our youth and families in San Francisco and San Mateo and obviously the East Bay? It's a regional approach.
Well, Edgewood's been around for a very long time, since the 1850s. So there's been a big impact. I would say kind of both maybe an old example and a new example. I think, like we mentioned, Edgewood really pioneered support system, and we've had years of impact there on supporting those, like I said, relative caregivers who take children in. We're talking about lots of grandmothers and aunties and other relatives who weren't necessarily expecting to take a child in at that point in their lives. And we provide them a really full range of support. And I think that's been a big impact in our community. A couple of other kind of newer programs that have a really big impact. One is our crisis stabilization unit in San Francisco on our Vicente campus, which is a 24-hour program where kids who are in mental health crisis can come 24 hours a day. It's an alternative to where kids usually have to go if they're having that kind of crisis, which is to an emergency room. It's a terrible place to be for kids who are already in crisis. They tend to sit there for hours at a time, and it's scary there. So our crisis stabilization unit offers an alternative where kids can come in a much more comfortable environment and have 24 hours of stabilization and assessment, and we help them get the treatment that they need to follow up. And that has a really huge impact because we've diverted many, many kids from psychiatric hospitalizations by having that program. And then the last one I just would like to mention in San Mateo, just because it's a little bit unique, is that we have 2 drop-in centers for what we call TAY youth, our transitional aged youth. These are 18 to 24-year-olds, young adults. And we have 2 drop-in centers in San Mateo County where they can come, not at the moment. We're offering our services virtually right now, but generally they can come. They have a place to hang out. They have a place to cook a meal, laundry, receive therapy services, use a computer to apply for jobs, a full range of support, which is just a pretty cool thing for young adults who need this care.
So if a family member or a young person was listening to this, how would they get in touch with Edgewood?
Yeah, so you can go to our website at edgewood.org and learn about all of our programs there. Particularly if you're interested or need services from Crisis Stabilization Unit, we recommend calling 415-682-3278. And again, that's a 24/7 number if you need help right away.
Thank you. And Gregg, you've been there for a while. What do you feel has been Edgewood's biggest impact on the community?
I think, in addition to our direct services, it is to help reduce the stigma around mental health, which we feel is very important. And I think if there's any positive out of the pandemic is that I think it has made a lot of people aware of what it's like to face, stress and anxiety. And, we are very committed to having, honest, open conversations about mental health, and that there is nothing to be ashamed about in having that discussion or saying that you need help. In addition to providing our services, we feel that that's a very important part of our mission, is helping to reduce that stigma.
Couldn't agree more. And one of the unique things that Edgewood is engaged in, since you've been around for decades, and I don't think most people realize you've been around since 1850, that's a good one, thank you, Justine, is that you're doing research and evaluation to improve your services. Gregg, would you like to talk a little bit about the evaluation and research services? And then we'll ask Justine to talk a little bit more about the measurement and the metrics that go into that.
Sure. In addition to the clients that we work with directly, we feel that it's really important that we document our best practices and share that with training of our own staff, but also to share it with other people in the profession. Through support of local family foundations, we launched the Edgewood Institute, which is dedicated to documentation, dissemination, and training around our best practices so that more organizations will adopt the lessons learned from our programs. And we have started with a focus on family healing as being an essential part of the training that we'll be doing.
And then, Justine, what goes into measuring and evaluating? What are the things that you and your team do to make sure that you gather this information?
Yeah, so we utilize measures that are generally sort of required for implementation for the contracts that we serve. So we have tools that we assess at the beginning, at the end of treatment. These are assessment tools that look at a wide range of mental health symptoms and diagnoses. We also do things like suicide assessments and pain assessments at the beginning of treatment. So right now we use those types of tools along with satisfaction surveys to track our outcomes and see how our clients are doing at the beginning and end of treatment. As Gregg said, we would like to deepen our work in outcomes and evaluation. It's when resources are tight, it's not always the thing that we're able to prioritize, and it's really important. So we are looking forward to relaunching the Institute and hopefully being able to more resources to research those kinds of outcomes in more depth.
Thank you. And Justine, staying with you, I would really love it if you could share with the audience one of your favorite moments of working at Edgewood.
Yeah, if it's okay, I have 2 different kinds of favorite moments that happen for me at Edgewood. One of them is big and one of them is small. So one kind of favorite moment that I have is when I'm fortunate in my position to get to work on sort of a bigger scale. For example, I really had a great moment when I was meeting with the director of our crisis stabilization unit and the leadership of the San Francisco Unified School District to talk about how we could support kids in school who are going into mental health crisis in school and how we could utilize our crisis stabilization unit to support them. And it's moments like that where I get very excited about the opportunity to kind of impact San Francisco kids at such a broad level and to think about how we can contribute to their safety on such a large scale. And then the other kind of favorite moment that I have is sort of the opposite. It's the individual one. It's the client who you mentioned, who just recently graduated from high school from Edgewood's non-public school, which is a school that supports kids who are not able always to go to a mainstream public school. And we had a very successful recent graduate from there who, as you mentioned, had also been my therapy client when he was 5 years old in our early childhood program, and just kind of really represented, I think, that continuum of care and the ability for a family to be supported sort of throughout the lifespan at Edgewood. We also had a client recently who left a note behind when she left a residential treatment program to go back home, and left a note for the staff thanking them for giving her the coping tools to go back home and kind of deal with her challenges with a set of tools rather than becoming suicidal as a way to cope, and left a note behind to thank everyone for that. So it's those kinds of things that kind of keep you going and remind you of our success.
Thank you. Both really good stories. I love the kind of systematic San Francisco Unified School District integration with mental health services with Edgewood, and then all the way down to the individual, and the fact that you follow someone from 5 years old to 17. So, Gregg, going to turn to you. You've also been there for a while. Could you please share with the audience one of your favorite stories of working in Edgewood and your feeling of its impact on the community?
One of our clients who had been part of our residential program at the San Francisco Vicente Street campus, who in the fall of 2020 was coming to the end of his time at Edgewood as he earning his high school diploma and graduating from our Edgewood Community School, and made tremendous progress over a year of the number of behavioral problems he had successfully been able to address, and was sort of reflecting on that time and realized he wanted to do something to give back, to show his appreciation for what he had accomplished. And one of the supports he had had from when he was, even before Edgewood, was that he had been in the Boy Scouts, and that he had seen older scouts who had been sort of mentors to him. And he realized he wanted to do something similar, and he was thinking about earning his Eagle Scout badge. So he came up with an idea of building a Zen garden on the Edgewood campus. And he and his counselor reached out to our team and worked with him to do fundraising with, friends, committee members. And then he also made a presentation to the boards of 2 local Rotary clubs who wrote some, small grants to help him accomplish this. All of this during COVID, and in which he was able to work with our staff and the volunteers that did a contactless delivery of supplies, and so that he was able to leave behind a legacy, so that future youth that are on our campus will be able to have meditation or mindfulness in that Zen garden. And we don't always hear from clients after they leave, but knowing that a client was able to leave a mark and help others in the future was really heartening.
Thank you. Another really wonderful story. So, Gregg, I'm going to stay with you. How can folks who are listening to the show get engaged in helping Edgewood and its programs? I mean, I know it's a little bit difficult now because we're still hunkered down in place to be a personal volunteer, but share with the audience, how can folks support you guys?
Well, there are a number of ways. Of course, financial support is always greatly needed and greatly appreciated. You can just go onto our website and there's a donation form, as well as we have, a variety of volunteer opportunities that are coming up that you can find either as an individual or, through a corporate congregation team, all of that, of course, done virtually for the immediate future, or to learn more about the work that we do. As part of the Edgewood Institute, we launched an educational series called our Lunch and Learn, where we focus on different specific programs. We've done one on our crisis stabilization unit. We've done one on our kinship services in the Bayview, and we'll be continuing them throughout the year. Those are all on our website in a way that you could learn more, as well as we have a wish list of items that we need, everything from personal protection equipment for our staff to games, clothing, through our Amazon wish list. Those are regularly updated, and that's the way that people can know that they donated something very specific that would help a specific child or family.
And do you have any special COVID-19 fundraisers or a fundraiser coming up in the springtime that you would like to talk about?
Sure. The Edgewood's annual fund called the Edgewood Fair that is put on by our group of volunteers called the Edgewood Auxiliary has been an event in San Francisco in person since 1967. Obviously, last year we had to pivot to doing it virtually, and we'll be doing it again virtually this year, and will be held May 20th and 21st. You can check it out on our website. Although we won't be able to do it in person, we will have a live fund-a-need and talking about successes we've had over the past year, despite the challenges, and a way that people can engage with us and know that they're supporting our response to COVID and the challenge that our youth will face after that.
So, final question for both of you. I'm going to start with Justine. What would you say are some of the positive things that could come out of the crisis to support mental health of our youth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Gregg mentioned this. My biggest hope would be that we may just come out of this with a really drastically reduced stigma around mental health. I think that, as you mentioned, Gregg, there's a lot almost in popular social media, things like that around mental health issues during this time being normal, expected, okay. There's a lot of focus on reaching out to each other, on self-care, things like that have come up as a result of the pandemic. And I hope and think that that could be actually something that lasts, that it's sort of enough people have experienced it that it will really change the amount of stigma associated with it. I do think that, again, sort of the focus on self-care, the focus on empathy and kindness to each other during this time, I hope will translate and continue on. And I think that, when kids go back to school, I think it's going to be really challenging. I think we're going to have, sort of a generation of kids returning to school who have experienced a year of really a historical level of crisis and trauma. And I think that's going to be really challenging. But I hope that one thing that will come out of that will be kind of a new level of understanding of the impact of trauma, the importance of childhood development, and that sort of the understanding of the meaning of mental health and trauma for kids will be much more widely understood, and that the stigma of it will be much less.
And Gregg, how about you?
I think the realization that we're all in this together and that we all can be supportive together. Justine said, we've had this heroic staff who have been, working in person on the front line, but they also need support too. And, just having, a wonderful meal that it's delivered because of a member of the community wanting to send that, or sending a supportive note of how important that is. And that continuing that, after we are able to all be back in person is really important, because all of our, even before the pandemic, all of our program staff doing truly heroic work, and they will continue it beyond the pandemic.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you, Gregg and Justine, for sharing Edgewood Center for Children and Families work today. We'll make sure that listeners have your contact information, website, and social media so they can follow Edgewood Center and get engaged in your work to help your mission. Please stay safe and healthy as we all work our way through this very strange new normal.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voices of Justine Underhill, the Chief Program Officer, and Gregg Biggs, the Director of Advancement from Edgewood Center for Children and Families. For more information about Edgewood Center for Children and Families, and to help them with their wish list of resources and make a donation, as well as volunteer, go to edgewood.org. In addition to the wonderful work of Edgewood Center for Children and Families, we hope that you'll consider diving into our past episodes to listen to and support the great organizations in our community that are providing a safety net for our children, teenagers, and young adults. Please listen to our interview with Doug in episode 19 from Huckleberry Youth Programs, and our interview with Charles and Demarie in episode 29 from At the Crossroads, along with our conversation with Liz Lynn of Be Magic and Shakina from 3rd Street Youth Center and Clinic, as well as How Books Change Lives with Emily, Riza, and Maureen from the Children's Book Project in Episode 6. And don't forget to tune in to next week's show with the Women's Audio Mission to find out how creating audio helps our youth deal with the pandemic. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, and Casey Nance at Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities, And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter @GeorgeCoster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.